or styling so that I don't have to blow dry
All right,
it.
we're going to go ahead and call this conference to order, please. We have one item on the agenda this evening, and it is literal years of work on short-term rentals, 3 different oversight committee chairs, so we are very excited to share this with the full council today to talk about short-term rentals. Take it away, Jeannie.
I know I said I was wondering earlier today, do I know less than I did? Because it was our first, but it feels like that to me for some reason today. And I put in your memo, and just as a timeline, yeah, we did from February of 2018, because we've never done this in front of all the council, August 19, we had 9 presentations. That sounds like a lot, but from looking across the country, when I've looked at other cities, it's taken people a while. This is not an easy thing to figure out everywhere, and a lot are gone back and have made adjustments. We did on one property that we did do an injunction on one property in 2018, and that is still pending. And then these are just significant dates here. And then in March, we did contract with the monitoring service. And just a little bit about the monitoring service. We had originally talked to short-term helper, and then there was host compliance. Well, they were the 2 major people, and I had decided we had talked to the folks from STR helper, because they were from Austin and they came up like 3 times, and they kind of I felt like they kind of understood Norman. And the next thing you know, they merged. Host compliance bought them out. However, they did retain a few of the people, the major people that came from short-term rental. They seem to have merged 2 of theirs. Short-term helpers was really seemed to be good on marketing and some of that, and then host compliance had more on the software, and so they've been really good. They at the time I wrote this, they had over 230 local governments. We entered into the contract for the first phase for address identification. I'm going to show you here in just a minute, just so we can know where they are in Norman. And we currently got 191. The majority are single families, aren't in an entire house. And there's other services available, such as helping us permit them, compliance monitoring, rental activity monitoring, and tax collection support. They don't collect the tax, but they help us even drill down further. So when we would get the hotel tax monthly report, and we looked at it and we're like, oh, they probably think they rented more than 4 times, we could look at it and know how many times exactly and what the rates were. If I can figure out how to do this. This is the dashboard that I have access to. It tells us a bunch of things over here. I'll just do it real quick for you. But it does say, you know, about 79% are from single families, and down here it tells 31% are 3 bedrooms, 11% are 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms is 15%. There's not any in compliance yet because we don't have anything for them to comply with. This is a neat little function here that I couldn't figure out the last time, but I can actually drill down to see, you know, where they are. Then it tells me the address, and you can click on it. And then they do a lot of background on comparing the listing photos with all the platforms, and they sweep Airbnb, Flipkey, VRBO, Expedia, and HomeAway and Expedia are owned by the same people now, and they update that. So when they know that they've got a match, they do that. I can already tell, like in August of 2019, there was 2 documented stays there. So I've got a lot of, can get a pretty good information now, and that's what the map looks like. So they're all around. We've got some out on the east side. I've looked at them. They're very nice. Then if you go to the rental units, I did take out one column for this presentation. I took out the names of all the owners. It's public, but I just so we wouldn't sit there and look like, oh, so-and-so owns them. And so there's lots of ways. This one looks different. It shows that this particular address is on bookings.com. It's also on Vacation Rentals. It's on HomeAway, on Airbnb, and on VRBO. So that's how many different platforms it's listed on. If I click on it, I'm going to get to the picture like I just showed you on the last one. it gives me information about how many days it's been on there, and it does give me the name of the people who own it. And I'll get to this in a moment when we go over the proposed ordinance, but I was able to get a pretty good count on how many were held by a corporation, an LLC, a trust, and I've got some information on that. So this, for now, this is what I have. I don't have any of the other other modules which we can get, but this has been very helpful, and it's been able to tell us at least where they are. We've got the addresses and what's going on. So if you have any questions about that, we can, let me see, Bryce is trying to help me remember how to do all this. So if there's no more questions about that, we'll go on into the licensing. We've talked about a number of different ways to handle these short-term rentals. Should we have special use in certain zoning districts? When I first presented last spring-ish, sometime, summer, we had looked at, like, New Orleans had tiers where you had certain requirements for commercial areas, certain for residential. So across the country, there's all kinds of ways to do this. As we've talked over the last number of months, and Jane has presented about, because that would be a zoning issue, about if we would make them special use or just a permitted use. And there's still some things that we would have to do, even if we decided it's going to be a permitted use everywhere. There still maybe need to be some changes in the zoning code, because we would, under residential and everything else, they would need to be listed as a permitted use. So there's still a little more work to be done if that, but we've had a lot of discussion about special use. I said last couple months ago, Stillwater passed theirs, and they had kind of a hybrid. They do a notice out, and if somebody sends anybody, it could just be one person, a protest, then that kind of switches it to a special use, and it has to go to Planning Commission in Stillwater and go through the whole process like a special use. I talked to Stillwater this week, or last week sometime, and one has gone to Planning Commission and it was denied. But I didn't ask the question, have there been more? No protest, but they've had one address that they had a protest, and once they got to Planning Commission, they denied it. This is just the purpose. It's for a period not more than 30 days. Brenda, as the city clerk, we switched that from the director of planning to the city clerk. It would be a licensing procedures just like we do on other things. The general conditions would be what everybody would have to follow. Get to it so I can keep up with myself. And there are things like, one of our major discussions has also been, and we decided last month or a couple months ago, I don't know if we decided, but we discussed that perhaps there'd be an applicant issued no more than 4 short-term rental licenses. There's lots of reasons for that. Concern that there could be 3 or 4 or 5 on a one street. It would become a de facto hotel type grouping of homes. So there's lots of reasons behind that. We came up with 4. We had really in the beginning just had it blank and we never had put a number in it. But there's some questions about that too. Nothing in an accessory structure would be permitted, like a shed, a garage, or an RV. We had a lot of discussion, or not a lot, but some discussion about the age, and then I looked at state law for renting. I'm sorry.
Councilmember Wilson?
So back up to the not permitted outdoors. There's a trying to think of the name of the deal. Hip Camper, which is a short-term rental type situation that uses rural land or farmland. Maybe somebody wants to stay on a goat farm. I don't know anything about that, but if somebody were to want to stay on the goat farm, it actually is a very popular thing for some folks to do. So I would like to maybe amend that to allowing, maybe it's a special use, I don't know what that looks like necessarily, but explore the options of allowing somebody with a rural agricultural zoned property to allow hip camper and those types of things.
HIP, H-I-P?
HIP.
Hip camper.
Hip
Okay.
camper.
Councilmember Bierman?
I think Sarita brings up a really good point. I get the sense that this is intended to prevent someone from parking 3 RVs on their front lawn on Berry Road, as an example, and renting them out. But hip camper is certainly something that is popular, and I sure wouldn't have a problem with it on agriculturally zoned land. So I don't know if at least we could do a permitted
use, special use.
something like that on agricultural land. I can see the value to it, and I think it has an unnecessary consequence if we leave it this way, in a way that is not burdensome or would adversely affect 20 acres over versus 100 feet away. So I would agree with that.
I wouldn't want that in an R1 or, but
Councilmember Hall?
I'd like to go back to the for short-term rental licenses and get a better understanding of why we landed on that number.
I reviewed a draft of the minutes, and I didn't really come up that there was
Do you
any.
want me to answer? Because I remember.
Okay, good.
Please do.
It was left blank. There was some discussion about not having any limit, since it's not like, you could own 10 liquor stores in this city and be able to
Right.
get licenses for all of them. And then there was some discussion and pushback from some who only wanted one. So I can't exactly say that 4 was decided on for any specific reason other than it was a way to split the baby, kind of. So I'm certainly, I would be fine with changing that, specifically because I've already heard some feedback that would inhibit plans for a particular property that actually has different parcels on it, but is kind of under one header, and the question of whether or not that entity would need to get an individual license for each one of those cottages, as an example, versus one per just the entire umbrella organization. So since I've already heard that there could be some issue with that, I certainly would be fine with changing it, because I personally didn't feel like we should have a limit. I felt like any limit was arbitrary. So
Well, I guess I'm coming back from that from the opposite direction, because I have followed this really from the beginning as a member of the community, and if we're gonna, I know we've had a long tortured discussion about special use and that sort of thing. So if we're going to reintroduce that idea for the outdoor accessory structures, and we're going to limit that, or we're going to talk about what we're going to allow by special use in agricultural areas, then kind of like to revisit the whole thing. And one of the things that as I was reviewing all this and getting caught up with Jeannie was still considering the idea, because I understand where you're coming from too, of in multifamily or residential multifamily zoning or commercial, industrial. I know we have apartments that are multiple units, and again, how would you treat that? Is that one license under the umbrella of a complex, or how would that be? And so I've been tossing around the idea of, if we're going to talk about, separating it out or redefining what's allowed in certain areas, having no restrictions other than doing a tier type of thing between R1 and then everybody else, because we've talked about the aspect of the concern, particularly in Core Norman, of disrupting characters of neighborhoods and the potential of having multiple, 4 maybe, or multiple houses that are operating as an Airbnb that could potentially be empty more than they're occupied. And so maybe in R1 just allowing 1 and not having any restrictions for the rest of the zoning areas, because they're already multifamily and beyond.
So we did talk about that both in August and kind of in,
Yeah,
su-
one
in,
here
in
in August.
subsequent
Yeah.
meetings. And I know that you've been following this kind of from the
Other
I
side.
don't want to say the other side of the
Yeah,
table
yeah.
but from the seats in the back.
Right.
And so one of the kind of the arbitrariness of it still kind of stuck with me throughout the whole conversation, because there's nothing that says someone can't, if there are 5 homes for sale on a street, buy them up and then just sit on them for 5 years before they have the money to renovate them.
Right.
Or rent them to someone for, do a 3-month rental and then let it sit for however long they choose to let it sit. So because we either by active choice or by passive choice have chosen not to police other behaviors in that way and say that someone who doesn't maintain their properties very well now can't rent their property anymore, since we, again, by choice or just by sheer existence, don't regulate that kind of behavior on what someone does in their property in that way. I personally didn't feel like we could do that here.
Right.
That, I felt like we couldn't really justify a limit on this when we don't enforce limits on behavior that we think would destroy the character of neighborhoods in other ways.
Yeah.
So I do understand where you're coming from. And so I think that's kind of another reason why we landed on 4, and maybe a kind of a quartering the baby, as it were, would be requiring special use for any above 4.
Yeah.
That if this is going to become your enterprise, that if you're going to be going above what we consider to be a reasonable limit, then maybe you have to apply for a special use for any more than a number that we land on.
Yeah, I guess I understand, and we've talked about this at length. So I guess the other piece that I'll just throw out there, just to keep it interesting, is we still have just the whole, when you mentioned that no matter what we do, it's going to probably require some tweaks to zoning changes anyway. So one of the other threads of discussion through all of this has been, is it a short-term rental, is just a different version of a long-term rental, or is a short-term rental lodging, and we already have special use permits for bed and breakfast in R1 and R2, and you have to get a special use to operate as lodging in these residential areas. So there's that side of it too. So
Councilor Wilson?
I think that I would be concerned about the fairness of the folks that already have gone through all the expense of the bed and breakfast situation, because that's a lot more. There's a lot more to it with fire protection and the stuff like that, I believe. So I guess I would be concerned about creating a leniency over here for this situation where they've already gone down this path for their situation. So that's my only concern. Not really a
Councilor
question.
Scanlon?
If Lee was in the audience while this was going on, I was in the balcony somewhere. I'm really not up to speed on this. But that said, I had occasion, I was at a lunch a couple of weeks ago with the guy that runs Sooner Legends. And his lament was he's lost a lot of customers to Airbnb. All of the overbuilt apartments that surround the university essentially have taken his business away, whether it's for a couple of days. We had some examples of weekly rentals by people that were contractors that were in and out. And he's lost a lot of business, he said. And we've lost a lot of hotel fees. I understand bed and breakfasts are kind of a different case, or I'd like to think they are, than the Airbnb rental of a university-type apartment. But I guess I'm concerned, whatever fee structure we might come up with, we're still at a disadvantage with regard to what we might have collected from the hotel fees.
yeah.
And I don't know how to carve that up, but it seems to me that we ought to make some effort to make some of that up, to make it, maybe or maybe not help people like Sooner Legends, but certainly help our financial situation.
Councilor Wilson?
Well, can we apply the room tax
Once we pass this.
once we pass this? Okay. So that's good news. At least it's not, oh, if you stay at this bed and breakfast, then you get the room tax, but if you stay at an Airbnb, so.
But that's the case right now, and we're losing money.
Right.
Councilor Hall?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with that because I think out of all of the discussion that's gone on in the last year and a half, I think there is total common ground to being committed to figuring out a way to collect the hotel motel tax and to even the playing field for the bed and breakfast establishments and Sooner Legends that are held to a much higher standard
Indeed.
than these commercial lodging enterprises are. So I think that for sure does give some impetus to let's get going so that we can start collecting all that. And I'm in total agreement with that.
Councilor Bierman?
One of the things that I brought up in August, and I have spoken with some of the bed and breakfast owners in the room, is that my hope is that it maybe instead of looking at chasing a standard that we've already set for bed and breakfast, we might need to look at the regulations and standards for bed and breakfast the same way we did for licensing fees and permit fees. Because that opened up a whole new topic when we were talking about medical marijuana, that we may have other fees in this city that are disproportionately high and maybe some that are disproportionately low. So maybe instead of just chasing a bar because it's been set that way, that we might even need to look at the bar and say, are there some regulations in here that maybe don't cost us as much to apply anymore? And do we need to look at maybe reducing the fee or changing what we look at? Does the health department now look at things that maybe we don't need to be looking at now? And so maybe we can reduce the cost of the fee or reduce the burden on bed and breakfasts and other types of lodging instead of chasing a bar that was set quite a while ago and certainly before technology advanced the way it has. So, I think that that's certainly a discussion that we need to have in relation to this, that maybe instead of forcing everyone towards the same standards that we've set for Airbnb, maybe we need to find a middle ground that we hold everyone to that is a little more fair and more equitable.
Councilor Holman?
I think that would make a lot of sense. I think it has been a real struggle determining what is the difference between this and rental houses. And you can own as many rental houses as you want. What is the difference between these and a commercial enterprise? Can a commercial business be in a residential area? Is a rental house a commercial business? Maybe. So it has been very difficult to kind of, from a fairness standpoint, differentiate where to draw the line there. And from what I understand, legally it's 30 days is what separates this between a long-term rental and a short-term. And, people have been renting rooms out forever. I mean, hostels have existed forever. I think the main difference is now it's on an app or a website so we can see it. But, I mean, it's not really a new thing. And I suspect it would continue going on even if these apps were to go away someday. It's been a big issue, too, thinking about the apartment complexes. There's some big apartment complexes that have a lot of vacancies, and if many of the units in that apartment complex are being used as Airbnb rooms, then is that apartment complex a hotel itself? Is it no longer an apartment complex, but now it's actually no different than Embassy Suites or a Holiday Inn? And then how to apply that tax to it in that case. And so I've found this to be a pretty difficult topic, and other cities all across the country have also been struggling, from what we've heard in these 9 meetings that we've had about this issue, that it's not been easy for anybody to figure out. So I feel torn between the two of you, because I do have a hard time applying a limit of 4 or 1 or 10 or to it when there's no limit of how many business enterprises you can get into in other aspects. At the same time, I understand that how the whole, street of houses were bought up by one person or a company, an out-of-state company that wanted to just use them as Airbnbs. That would be an issue for that neighborhood, and that could be an issue maybe in any neighborhood, really, in Norman. So, I don't know that I have a real solid answer to what we should do with this one, because I think maybe having to look at, instead of comparing it to what we do with other things, maybe we need to look at how we're doing the other things. So I'm not necessarily ready to place a limit, but I understand the need for one. So is that clear?
Clear as mud one
Yeah.
meeting.
That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, me too.
Muddled.
I kind of like the suggestion that Councilor Bierman had about 4, and then you get approval after that, because then it can be reviewed, and we'll see if it's 8 houses in one street or something like that, or it can be completely different parts of town.
I mean, could
But what do we,
Councilor Wilson?
what would we as a council base our turning them down decision on?
I think it'd be proximity, so you don't own a
I think
block.
that we need to codify that if
Yeah.
it's going to be that.
Yeah, clear. We've learned to be very clear in things. Yeah.
If it's done as a special use, the standards in the zoning ordinance, I think, already give you some guidance, because it's things like compatibility with the neighborhood and the abutting properties, things like that. So if you're starting to get more and more of them.
So that's already written into the special use procedural.
Yeah.
Okay, well then that's good.
Councilor Holman?
But I also have been thinking too that, looking at some of the numbers, and you might have some examples that are different, but just based on the examples we've seen, it would seem unlikely to me that anybody would buy a house and just use it for Airbnb, because on some of these it's like 2 stays a month, 3 stays a month. I don't know that that would pay for the cost of owning that house, really, if you're only getting like 2 or 3 stays a month. So I don't know, that maybe there's some that are full every night, but I've never used an Airbnb actually. I like the actual hotel. I like going to a real hotel, or a bed and breakfast. But I've never. I don't know, just going to somebody's house that I don't even know seems weird to me. So I've just never been into it. And, hotel showers are really nice. So hot water lasts forever.
I know. I think
Why?
to Stephen's question, I think that's going to be more proximity to certain areas. So I think proximity to campus is probably, could pull the likelihood of having something be short-term rental only. I know that there is one over on Flood by Main Street that is, because my parents stay in it every single time they come. And they like the consistency of going to, because they can't stay at my house. First, I didn't want them to, and now I won't let them. But now, they like staying in that house because they know what they're going to get every single time. They know they can walk to Sprouts. They know they can walk to Old School Bagel. So they really enjoy that. But I think more of them are going to be someone's second home, or they've bought a new house and they're not ready to sell it yet, or their parents' house, and when their parents move in with them, maybe it gets rented out. And frankly, I have a couple friends who they rent their house out every single game day, and it always gets rented. They just go and stay with friends or go to Tulsa for the weekend. They just make a weekend of it. So I think there's probably going to be a wide range. And I don't know that there is necessarily a problem that we're solving yet. It kind of feels like we're trying to anticipate problems. Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways maybe we can, but I think in others we have no idea, because we haven't actually issued these licenses yet. So we don't know if there are a dozen people who own more than 4 Airbnb listings or 1.
I could count
So,
them up. I mean,
yeah.
I looked earlier. I've been off today, but I counted up. There are 25 that are owned by either a corporation, an LLC, and there's 8 owned by a trust. I think as I was flipping through there to look, if I saw one that had more than one, it's only a few. There's not like Mr. Smith, Mr. Smith, Mr. Smith, Mr. Smith.
Right.
There's very few like that.
It
But
could be
I
different
I did do a
LLCs.
quick count earlier today on, because we have the question about should it be only in the title of a natural person or a trust. And last time, I didn't change it on this, but last time we did discuss it. Yeah, maybe an LLC would be okay because a lot of people do that for estate planning, financial reasons.
I was gonna bring that
Yeah, I
up.
didn't make the change in there, but I was going to talk about it.
Councilmember Holman?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, that the corporation or the trust or things like that could just be somebody has a rental property company, or the trust, the house they got is part of a trust or something
Financial
like that.
planning.
Smart business planning to have every
And
single one in an
liability too,
LLC.
yeah, I guess if you don't want to.
Take down your whole
That's why
corporation.
I wouldn't let anybody stay in my house if I wasn't there. I know you can like report it on the app. I just would feel weird about it. So,
79% are single-family homes.
and so, did we clarify that you had to be the property owner to do it? Because,
Well, I hadn't gotten there yet.
okay.
We did talk about that though in August.
All right, let's let her keep going.
Yeah.
So, and in these general conditions, these are just conditions, and they can be modified or changed however we need them to. It seems like to me our core question is special use where permitted everywhere, just licensing. But we want to prohibit any commercial or social events, no weddings, no graduation parties, bachelorette parties, that kind of thing. If it's a character of the neighborhood, we wouldn't have any noise and glare. In other words, we want it to still fit inside the neighborhood. The one about only issued to a natural person whose name appears on the deed or a trust, we discussed that, and when I reviewed the minutes from last time, it was leaning towards, yes, it can be an LLC or a corporation, because some people, and that's why I counted it up, I know somebody has a number of rentals in town, and each house is the different LLC, and it's all for the protection of the owner, so they their liability and stuff like that is better managed. So it doesn't mean because it's owned by an LLC that it's a big corporation. Most of them are people have just put them in that for their own financial protection.
Yeah.
We would want to prohibit any sound equipment, outdoor music, musical instruments, the parking code. We want to identify a local person that can respond within an hour, because as we saw on the dashboard, that the majority of these are single-family homes with the owner is not occupied there. The license number on any advertising. You got to have a building permit. The house has to be habitable.
Can we require that I know we discussed it at some point, but require that they leave some sort of information sheet in the home that
Yes.
has all the reporting numbers in it? Okay.
I've got that. And just application requirements, obviously, on the application, we could make that any way we want. I looked at Stillwater's, I've looked at other people's, we can make our form any way we want it. We want to be able to get a hold of them. Who is it? Where do they live? What's their cell phone? What's an email? We don't want it to have any outstanding code. Pay the hotel, and it was brought to my attention that, sales tax is also paid out of that. Hotels pay that, so we would want to collect that, and that is, Anthony might tell me if I'm a little off base on this, but that's submitted, the bed and breakfasts and all that's submitted monthly, and
Sales taxes,
and so
two
and
different submissions, but
there's different, and the owner of the property, it's on them to get this tax paid to us, and if with this monitoring system, with the other modules available, I'm not sure who or how we're going to do that, but we would be able to say, well, we know it's been rented, but we've not received any tax from, 201 West Gray. And so we would be able to monitor that. Insurance, we've not landed on a number. There was discussion about if it's your home and you have homeowner's insurance, and even if it's a long-term rental, you've got to have some kind of insurance. I'm not really sure where to land on that. We could limit the application would say how many bedrooms are there, what could be the occupancy. We talked about having a layout of the property, including parking and where the fire exits are, so we can have for safety reasons, how to get in and out of bedrooms and the windows. We want operational smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, comply with all of our minimum property maintenance building and other things like that. The one that was added, had lots of discussion, is this notification of affected property owners. Okay, in a special use, you've got to notify 300 feet and use a certified mailing, a property, 350 and use a certified mailing. So if you're gonna do a bed and breakfast, you've gotta notify all these people within 350 feet. And discussion was, well, that seems like a lot, and that's another cost for folks who wanna do the short-term rentals. We discussed just really, it just needs to be informational, like, hey, there's one being an application in your neighborhood. Not that you can really protest it, but here's a good lot of information that you can have. Who is the property owner? Who are the local contacts? At least you have that. Well, then after discussion, and Councilmember Hall actually reminded me, in our historic district, when you apply for a historic district COA, this is how I landed on this one on number 12, is they just have, and we talked about just your neighbors or the people behind you, the alley across the street. In the historic district, when we do notification of that, we just do it immediately adjacent to or directly across the street or alley of the subject property, and it would have information, the address and phone number of the owner, the local contact, maybe other contact information for city offices, code enforcement, and police. And then, as with the historic district, a notice letter that we could prepare or have a form that they need to send out, and similar to what we do on the HD, and it just says, hey, somebody has applied for this. This may be going in next door or across the street from you. This is just a notification. The difference in with the special use is there would be no protest element in it.
Scanlon.
What do we mean by inspections?
Wait, did I even?
You mentioned inspections,
Oh, did
but
I
you
just
didn't say
fly over that and not
anything.
even talk about it? Lots of talk about inspections. The last meeting we did land on, it's a $50 inspection fee currently for bed and breakfasts and hotel motels. Kelvin Winters, who's the code enforcement supervisor, provided me some great information. Right now, if our code enforcement inspectors officers would do this, right now they have about 65 places they inspect a year already. Hotel, motels, bed and breakfasts, sorority fraternities, mobile home parks, impound yards, rooming houses. Already we do that, and one of the code officers goes with a fire official, and I don't know what they do when they get in there, but they do an inspection. The first inspection is probably a lot more lengthy and a little more info on it. We charge that $50 a place. It would, I'll speak for Jane and her staff, I guess, it would be a lot on the inspectors, the code enforcement, to get 100, 150 in. I think this 191 we see now is going to drop, because Councilmember Holman is probably right. If somebody's just rented a room once or twice here and there, they're probably not going to want to hassle with this, and they'll decide to not do this at all. So I think we're not going to see 190 people make application. I think it will drop, but even if it drops 40 or 50, that's still 150. We've had discussion about private inspections, like a home inspector. That could be as much to the applicant as up to maybe $300-400. We would have our form, they'd have to fill it out, look at all the stuff, check all the boxes, but that could be an additional cost. And at the last meeting, we discussed not having the applicant bear that cost.
And if we're doing an inspection, fire and code, and we certify compliance, and this is essentially a commercial operation, what's our liability, if any, if something happens?
Say that again.
Yeah,
If
I'm
they
What
do
I'm
it
wondering
outside.
about, if we are inspecting and certifying compliance for both fire and code, and something happens, a fire,
It's the
what's our,
same.
do we have any liability?
No, and it would have to be a tort claim filed under the Governmental Tort Claims Act, and there's exemptions in there that cover us.
That's right.
I
So that,
I would hope so, but I just needed to ask.
Caught me, I had not had that question asked, Councilmember Scanlon, I went blank. But so, there's that to be discussed.
Councilor Hall, you had your hand up next.
I was just gonna go back to the notification, because that's been a point of contention over all of these meetings, and, the just general discussion of, how, intense a notification process is, and it's on the property owner to supply the certified list and all that. So, I felt like the notification piece was still a really important component to residents in neighborhoods, and that we already had a standard with the Historic District Commission that would do just the adjacent property, and I feel like that's a pretty good compromise to go that route. Because it does,
Not the 350 feet, just
Yeah.
adjacent properties, okay?
because I feel like in most neighborhoods, that's gonna spread, the word is gonna spread likely, and the people in the adjacent area at least have the information, which is what's been important, and have contact information for the property owner, and then if there are issues that require city assistance, there's phone numbers for code compliance. I mean, they have information about how to be proactive if they feel like they're not being a good neighbor. So it cuts out some of the objection, I feel like, to the that notice when it's not, like Jeannie said, it's not part of the special use process, and there's no real remedy. But I think what most people want is just knowing what is operating in their neighborhood, and I think that helps answer that.
I could agree to that compromise. It's like you talked about, not making it too crazy for people who don't rent all the time. And so that seems reasonable in my head. Councilmember Bierman.
One of the things that I'm a little surprised we haven't talked about through all of these meetings, and I don't see it in here, is what are we doing in terms of compliance with these licensing requirements? Because, as you mentioned, there might be some people who are renting out once or twice a month who don't want to mess with the licensing requirements, but that doesn't mean they're not going to still try and rent once or twice a month. So we don't have anything in here about failure to acquire a license. We don't have any process built in. Are we going to send them a letter, and then if they don't apply for one within 30 days, we're going to do something else? I mean, so I just am wondering what we're going to do to encourage compliance with this, because I could see a lot of property owners who want to do this just going, well, I'm just going to try and do it and then apologize later if I get caught.
Can I answer that?
I feel the
Well,
compliance service will help us
The
with that.
monitoring service would tell us, once we got them all, they knew what was licensed, and all of a sudden one popped up on the advertising platform at 201 West Gray. Either they have a part of their module, or we could do it in-house. More than likely, it's what we do now, right, Kelvin? If we send out a letter saying, hey, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. You need to be licensed. We see that you're advertising on Airbnb or whatever. You need to come in and be licensed with the city. There is a penalties provision in Section 13 that it can, it could be a violation, and it could be filed in municipal court, and it even states it can be a separate and a distinct offense,
Each time.
daily. But for now, it'd be like, this isn't nearly the same, but sort of like a grass and weed violation. We send them out, you're violating it, you've got to come into compliance. And that's what the monitoring service catches us up, because I understand they sweep, I think that's the term they use, like daily. And tomorrow I might pull this up and might say there's 192 or 197. And they will know once we get all the balls going here, if 190 are licensed and 4 more pop up overnight, either they can generate letters, or we could do it, figure that out. But there's a way to let people know, hey, you need to be licensed, and they wouldn't be able to fly under the radar. Now, could a few? Perhaps. I don't know. Maybe they're advertising on Craigslist or somewhere else, but I can't imagine being a short-term rental and not utilizing one of these platforms.
The general conditions in here is not any different than any other license we require, and I think it covers it. It says that you can't operate one without having a license and paying the appropriate fees, so it wouldn't be handled just like anybody that needed a food service license that didn't have one. I mean, and there's provisions in Chapter 13 for enforcement of those.
Great.
We're getting close, so I'm just going to kind of fly through a couple of things that I have added. One, that the issue license requirements, and it's a name, address, that kind of thing. One I did add, and I'm glad that Councilmember Patron was able to step back in. I know that you had some concerns about HOAs, and when I was re-looking at Stillwater's, they have this section in there about covenants, deed restrictions, and overlay requirements. And I thought that may fit pretty well, that unless it's subject to some other overlay district or zoning restriction or restrictive covenants, so if if your HOA prohibited it, then that would, then you're done. And I noticed Stillwater had that, and I thought I knew that was one of your concerns.
I like that.
And I added that. Fees, we landed on $150 plus the $50 for annual inspection. Our goal mainly is to, if we continue with this monitoring service, is to at least recap enough money to keep them going, and that would do it. Mayor, section 3506 talks about what's to be posted.
I have a question about the HOA thing now. I have an HOA. I live in a somewhat newer neighborhood. Some of these older neighborhoods don't. And so you're pushing them to neighborhoods without HOAs unless, I guess, HOAs may not address it. It just seems odd.
Well, I mean-
Has there been any kickback on any of this from?
Well, I was wondering if Councilmember Patrone, in your daytime job, are newer neighborhoods recognizing this as a component in HOAs? Because I haven't seen it in HOA language, but they're not current HOA. The older this industry really didn't exist to the level where it became an issue.
I have not seen it come up yet. However, I mean, HOAs have a meeting every year.
Yeah, I can
and
imagine neighborhoods
they
moving on
add
this if we add
language,
that in there.
and what's fine in some neighborhoods with an HOA is they take issue with other things. They don't want certain parking in the street, or they get upset about different types of things. So I just want to make sure that neighbors, they should have that. If they're paying those kinds of dues to have that kind of oversight and they want to live under those kind of rules, then that's their choice.
Councilman Hall?
And I really understand that, but as you pointed out, in older neighborhoods in Core Norman, that's not an option. You can't go back and create an HOA, so we don't have any kind of path to be able to say we don't want those operating in our neighborhood. So, I mean, that is a little problematic that, and that's, I think, part of the reason that we keep talking about if it's, a residential neighborhood, should there be a little bit higher standard to give people an option of whether they want to do it or not?
Well, I lived in an HOA that passed the bylaws after I moved in there that you couldn't even have a long-term rental.
Yeah, there are HOAs that do have
So
that.
there are HOAs that currently prohibit long-term rental, and I would imagine they're going to all be moving into, they don't want long-term rentals, they're not going to want short-term rentals. So,
Councilman Holman?
I think that would probably be another area where we need to look at how is that same thing being applied, because just on the covered driveway, the carports. I think we put in there that says if HOAs, say you can't have it, then that supersedes our city ordinance that says you can. So I think we'd have to look at other areas that says there's, I don't know necessarily special treatment, but different treatment if you have, or that our rules defer to HOAs.
We're pointing out we don't enforce provisions of HOAs.
So regardless of whether that language is in the ordinance, that's still the case. So if your HOAs prohibit them, then someone might have a private cause of action if you have a license for one in your neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah,
Councilor Wilson?
Yeah, you read my mind.
I know.
haven't even decided if I
See
had
her
a question
face.
or
There's a
not.
question coming.
But so I know we're going to talk about this in some others since we brought up HOAs situations. That just changes it from city can't enforce anything, but the HOA can then personally sue each other, the people inside of that, right?
Yeah, if it's in the covenants, it's a private agreement between the property owners essentially, and so they can always enforce that against others in their neighborhood. They could amend them and allow them if they wanted to do that, but that is separate and apart from any ordinance we would have about it.
Okay, thank you.
and then just the final one, there is some, language about if they can be denied, suspended, or revoked. And I know we're getting close, I guess. Tell me what to do.
We gave you a whole bunch of feedback.
Yeah. And
Are you interested in kicking it back to oversight now that you've had full input from council?
No.
The only reason why I would say that is get a clean final draft, or do we just want to bring it back to a study session?
I think we could probably bring it back to another conference or a study session instead. I don't think that it necessarily needs to go back to oversight for the changes that we're thinking about.
Jeannie?
I can get a lot of the changes. I'm still a little unclear about any kind of special use thing.
Okay.
And permitted use, we were gonna look into the A1 and A2. Councilmember Hall brought up, I know that Jane and I are gonna tomorrow go, now, where did we land on that? I think that's the most important component. We can, tweak out these conditions, the specific things. Can they have in their accessory structure or not? But are we going to just total open licensing in every zoning district?
I like what
Except for the
Stillwater
hip
did.
camper.
If someone has a concern, then it goes to special use at that point.
Yeah.
What is everyone's thoughts on that? I thought that was interesting. Councilor Bierman, you look.
I don't know. I feel like that's just. I don't know. We have a protest threshold, not just a single entity or a single parcel being able to say.
You could do the
"Hold up
threshold
the
then. I'd be fine with
process."
that.
I agree with threshold.
I personally think that the building in of the ability to revoke the license for repeated violations addresses a lot of the concerns that someone might have with any kind of opposition. I would be more in favor of leaving it open up to 4 and then special use above that to address, the over proliferation of Airbnbs by one entity or organization. But I hesitate to put any kind of restriction on simply the existence of them in any particular zoning, because like I said, you could be a crappy landlord and still be allowed to own as many crappy rental homes as you like and leave them unoccupied or have them occupied at your leisure. And so having this be so different from what we allow someone else to do with their own property simply because they call it something else, that gives me a lot of heartburn. So I kind of think the compromise to the compromise would be special use over 4.
Councilor Holman?
I can go along with that for now, and as much as I may not want to, would be willing to revisit it should other issues arise. But I think that could be
No, you
good.
guys have another one.
Councilor Hall, anything to add?
I just have a question that was asked of me of what a definition of a stay is, of like how many days, like if you're in a short-term rental. Do you want to
I
help
think
me?
a stay means a night.
One night
One
or
night.
one booking?
Okay,
Okay, so when you said 2 stays,
That's
that
what it
meant
looks like to me, but
2 nights.
okay, thank you.
Not 2 5-night stays that could be 10 days.
I don't think so, no,
total.
because
Okay,
but I'll confirm with the company.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, Jeannie, is that a little bit clearer?
Yes, ma'am.
Carbs in my face.
All right, let's get it cleaned up and bring it back to study
Jeannie.
session. You have 5 minutes, council members.
Okay.
Stuff some carbs.
So